Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It's June 7th, 5:29 a.m. Central Time. Grain markets are lower this morning. Brian Split is here. Guys, let's start off with this Brazil news that was out yesterday.
Brazilian corn and soybean exports could be disrupted as a result of a surprise change in tax policy. Brazil's finance ministry announced earlier this week that it will be tightening the use of government tax credits. The measure is aimed at reducing the government's budget deficit. It's going to go into effect immediately, but will need congressional approval within 4 months to remain valid. On Thursday, the Brazilian soybean and cotton industries joined the biofuels and food lobbies to reject the plan. According to industry experts, the measure will make Brazilian soybean producers less competitive and reduce soybean prices. Some believe the measure could cause some crush in biofuel production to relocate to the US and Argentina. ADM and other commercials withdrew new offers for soybeans and corn this week as they awaited clarity. This news is at least somewhat responsible for yesterday's row crop rally.
I was told that this was the entirety of the reason for the row crop rally yesterday. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be the catalyst for it, and we saw the day before the news actually dropped, the July-November soybean spread was up substantially, right back up to recent highs. And so, if this is indeed true, where the producer is going to, um, you know, slow down on their sales of corn and soybeans to wait and see how this thing plays out, and again, it needs to be approved within 4 months by Congress. That would bring some business to the U.S. So the action in the spread makes a lot of sense. We're hearing Kofco came in and bought soybeans for August, September out of the Gulf. That supports the price action we saw on the spread. Whether there was anything else on top of it, yesterday there was a lot of buying in a lot of different markets. The energy market was recovering. The soft markets were very strong again. Cotton was up. We had some really big moves in silver again. So there was kind of a risk on day, but directly related to the grains, I think this was the story.
So, yeah, specifically what happened is like your commercials in Brazil withdrew a bunch of offers on the export market. Like, we're not selling anything until we know a little bit more about this situation. So part of me says, okay, maybe this is friendly, but then the other part of me says this does absolutely nothing to add or subtract bushels from the balance sheets globally. It's a policy thing, which I think could steer some business to the US, but I don't know that it's like a game changer. I mean, it sounds like this could last for a couple months though, the way that it sounds. So could Brazilian soybeans just be less competitive and kind of off the market for a moment and steer some export business? I don't know. I mean, we don't have any follow through here yet this morning. Maybe it's coming.
Correct. Yeah, no follow through this morning. It was a quiet night session. Let's see what we do during the day. I will say that when we looked at the charts on the premium video on Wednesday, we identified that we were at extremely important support for both corn and soybeans, and that we needed some kind of a catalyst. But we held that support. We had a very big outside day higher in December corn yesterday. We had traded below the previous day's low and then closed above the previous day's high. That's the same thing we did coming out of Memorial Day weekend, but we did it to the downside instead. So hopefully there's some follow through over the next couple days.
It's funny how the news and the technicals can line up sometimes. Let's get to the drought monitor.
Several areas of the Corn Belt received rainfall over the last week. Drought conditions improved in northern Minnesota and southeastern Nebraska. A lack of precipitation caused conditions to worsen in northwestern Illinois and northeastern Missouri. Steady rainfall throughout the spring season has nearly erased all drought conditions across the Corn Belt. Heavy precipitation fell across portions of the High Plains in the last week. Drought conditions improved in northwestern North Dakota, north central Oklahoma, and across western regions of Kansas. When we look at the percentage of U.S. areas experiencing drought, corn country 3%, soybeans 2%, winter wheat 21%, spring wheat 3%, and cattle country 9%.
3% of U.S. corn areas experiencing drought. That's about as low as you'll ever see it. I don't know if I've ever seen it at zero, but that's bottom of the barrel. So I guess, Brian, the question now is this. Okay, we have a dry forecast. Is it bullish or bearish?
I don't think dry for a little bit is bullish. It's got to stay dry for a while, and then you have to have the heat come too. So I think there's one outfit specifically.
So you're saying heat is bearish now?
No, heat needs to come to be
Heat would
bullish.
be bullish. Okay.
Right. You have to have hot and dry. That's the combination that the market wants to see. Now we can argue agronomically all
Right.
day about, the planting pace, and are we seeing, leaching of the nitrogen and the
Mhm.
stands and all that. And I don't think the fund manager is going to get that deep in the weeds right now about it. They just want to see, okay, we're
Yeah.
starting to turn dry. Is there heat that's going to follow this up, and does it stay dry as we get into late June, early July?
You got some rain coming back in toward the tail end of like the 5 to 10 day period to the Western Corn Belt. Eastern Corn Belt, like Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, are going to be on the drier side for at least 10 days. And then the 6 to 10 looks threatening ish. There's some forecasters talking about heat. The GFS I looked at early this morning was not really pushing the heat. So they'll be back and forth on this. And I did hear some forecasters talking about heat in the extended forecast day. Maybe that could have had something to do with yesterday's rally also.
U.S. corn export sales were strong last week. Net corn sales were reported at 46 million bushels, up 46% from the previous week and up 41% from the prior 4-week average. Mexico was the largest corn buyer for the week. Net soybean sales were disappointing at 7 million bushels, down 43% from the previous week and down 42% from the prior 4-week average. The Netherlands were the largest soybean buyer for the week. Net wheat sales reductions of 8 million bushels were down substantially from the previous week and from the prior 4-week average. The majority of wheat sales reductions came from Mexico.
Corn sales were really good. China actually bought a small amount of old crop U.S. corn. Soybean sales are not good. We've still got this big new crop soybean problem. Worst book of sales since 2005. China still has not booked a single cargo of U.S. corn or U.S. soybeans for new crop delivery. That's not abnormal for corn, but for soybeans, it's absolutely abnormal. And here's a chart. I don't know if you can see this, Brian. So 2024, the line here is at zero. It's being covered up by 2019, which was the trade war year where China bought next to zero. Um, so I don't know. Is this a big problem, or is it too early?
I mean, it's a big problem right now. Your pace analysis would suggest that the USDA is already off on
Yeah.
their export demand assessment for the new crop. Uh, but this right here may be what tells us how the market really feels about the news in Brazil. So if we start to see China come in and book new crop soybeans after that news, that might suggest that there's a little bit of a turn in sentiment there, especially if they come in for additional old crop.
China could make up this gap in 1 week. They could come in if they really thought if this Brazil thing, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, but if the Brazil thing's really an issue, China could come in and buy 2-3 million metric tons in a week
Right.
and then be above average. So this is not the end of the world. It's just like we're kind of waiting, and it's been weeks now that we've been waiting for China to come in and buy new crop soybeans, and they just haven't done it.
USDA reported a flash sale of corn on Thursday. U.S. exporters sold 6 million bushels of corn to unknown destinations for delivery during the current marketing year. Accumulated corn sales for the current marketing year are up 34% compared to the same period last year.
Is 152 a China number, or is that not a China number?
152 is a
That
couple
132 is a
boatloads.
China number, isn't it?
132 is a couple boatloads. That's generally a China number. I don't know. Unknown destinations. A lot of people will believe that that is generally going to be China. Probably more often than not, unknown ends up being China. Um,
Small amount, not a needle mover, but it's good to
No,
see
but the
nevertheless.
sales weekly last week were very solid, and
Yeah.
so I think that's going to be something to watch as we get into the WASDE report. Is does the old crop balance sheet tighten up just a touch more because of our export demand and because of our ethanol demand? Frankly, our ethanol exports are phenomenal, and I think that's a big product of the high prices of sugar.
DDG exports are good too. USD had some stuff out earlier this week or yesterday.
The European Central Bank cut interest rates for the first time in 5 years on Thursday. The ECB cut its key interest rate by a quarter point from 4% to 3.75%. The reduction was made even though the EU's rate of inflation is at 2.6%, well above the 2% target. Inflation is projected to remain well over the 2% target in the EU until late in 2025. The rate of inflation, however, has declined substantially from its record high of 9.2% in 2022. On Wednesday, Canada also reduced its headline interest rate from 5% to 4.75%.
The cuts have begun, and the United States is now in a similar situation to the EU where We haven't hit our inflation target, but the markets are indicating that you're going to see a cut by September. When does this materially affect the money borrower in the U.S., Brian? They're going to need more than a quarter point.
Yeah, I mean, a quarter point doesn't move the needle very much, but it
For maybe
changes
some of the
sentiment and
markets, it
it
does.
changes direction of the movement, right? So I think the markets will react to it. And I think anecdotally, it's weird because we're in that phase in the stock market where bad news economically is good for the stock market currently, because that raises the chances of seeing interest rates lowered. But if you look back at history, when you have a rate increase environment, it's when they start to lower the rates that the market actually starts to react negatively to it.
I think for most of the people watching who are borrowing money to grow corn and soybeans or whatever, you're not going to see a material change in your rate situation for a while, at least until next year and probably beyond that. What did cattle do yesterday?
They were lower once again. Feeders were an average of $2 lower, except for 17 cents higher in the June contract. Live cattle were 90 cents lower. Box beef was mostly higher yesterday. Choice ended the day at $316.21. That was up $1.42. Select was 7 cents lower to close at $300.83.
Outside markets on Friday, guys. U.S. dollars about flat. Stocks are about flat. Bonds are a little bit lower. Crude oil is up 26 cents at 75.81 in the July WTI. Have a great weekend, guys. We'll talk to you on Monday. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.